We spent a lot of time parsing what Duke Tobin had to say in Mobile, Alabama. Let's get to the rest of his comments that point to where his priorities are for the Cincinnati Bengals offseason.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien, and we are Locked On Bengals, your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. If you're new to the show, you can subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode as we keep you up to date with all things Bengals all off-season long and into the regular season, of course. It's a year-round program. We don't miss anything here on Locked On Bengals, so you're in the right place if you want to stay up to date. And for all the everydayers out there and everyone who makes us your first listen, welcome back. We appreciate all of you so very much. This episode brought to you by PrizePicks, where you can get $50 instantly on your first $5 play. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL to take advantage of that offer. James, today we dive back into the Duke Tobin comments from the Senior Bowl interviews with Kelsey Conway and Jeff Hobson of Bengals.com, Cincinnati. .com for Kelsey Conway. And the focus has been, when we talked about these comments up until now, on the big three contracts that are up for discussion for the Bengals this offseason and financial aspects thereof, in addition to a little bit about the players themselves. We're going to get more into alternatives, alternative plans and stuff like that in the future. But today, there was certainly some indication from Duke Tobin's comments in these interviews that points to the rest of his priorities for this offseason. And there's definitely a focus. Let's start with the offensive line on the trenches and on the offensive side with guard play.
Yeah, Jake, let's get into guard, something that I think a lot of our listeners and viewers have focused on, have prioritized. So how big of a priority is it for the Bengals this offseason? Well, let's start with a quote from Duke Tobin. This to Kelsey Conway, quote, "The way we play requires a firm pocket, and we've hired a new offensive line coach. We're hopeful that there can be some improvement made technique-wise with him." And obviously they hired Scott Peters last month, moved on from Frank Pollock. And he said, for sure, there will be competition at those positions. We have to evaluate who will come back and who will not come back. It's a spot that we're focused on. We're going to continue to work with guys that we have on the roster, and we're going to try to evaluate how to get better with the guys that aren't currently on the roster. And whether that's young guys from the draft, whether that's free agents, we're going to add to that group. We're definitely going to add to that group. And honestly, I think that's exactly how the approach should be, right? Obviously, you want Scott Peters to make the guys that you are going to keep better. At the same time, you can't neglect what has been a spot of weakness, and the guard spot, really, I would say outside of 2022 for Alex Kappa, has been a weakness at both spots, more so than not at any point, but certainly over the past couple of seasons.
Yeah, I think definitely over the past couple of seasons, definitely throughout the Joe Burrow era, the offensive line in general has been an issue. And there's, I think been maybe a handful of games in that period of time where we felt like, the guards are okay this week, going into a game, and we haven't thought about the threat that exists in the middle of the pocket for Joe Burrow to deal with. And Duke Tobin highlights that at the beginning of the quote, right? Like, the way we play it requires a firm pocket. And so that's one of the reasons that they're thinking Scott Peters, pass pro technician, we can change the way that we're playing stylistically, perhaps on the interior offensive line for the way that Joe Burrow wants to play football. But also, the reason that this is a noteworthy quote is because he did not say it's a spot we're focused on. He did not say we're going to add to that group. We're definitely going to add to that group, to emphasize it. He did not say that about every position that he was asked about. Mm-hmm. And he did go out of his way to say that about this spot. And we're going to get to the defensive side of the ball too, and the things that he talked about and the things that he didn't talk about. But it's not just a throwaway for Duke Tobin when he says we're going to add to that group. That is, from him, a very clear indication that there are plans to spend assets this offseason to improve a position. It's not just we like the guys we have. There's going to be competition. It's a spot we're focused on. And you get that kind of wording from Duke Tobin. I think that very clearly indicates that this is a big priority for him and the Bengals front office this offseason.
And obviously it should be. We all agree there. And we've, especially the past couple of episodes, have been, I don't even want to say critical, but honest about where the Bengals are at, reacting to some of Duke Tobin's comments. And that might not be the most optimistic view given what he said or didn't say. What he's saying here is exactly what I want to hear. Now, they still have to go do it. But the approach in late January at the Senior Bowl when he made these comments, or now early February, pre-combine, it's what it should be is, oh, yeah, we're going to have guys that are no longer on this roster. Made it very clear. And we're going to have turnover. And we're going to address it. We're going to add, whether it's in the draft or free agency. It's what it needs to be. Because I think that throughout the Joe Burrow era, if you just sum it up, the Bengals offensive line has been bad throughout the entire era. That doesn't mean that they have 5 bad linemen now. I think they have 3 good linemen. And by good, I mean good starting level linemen, not assessing the backups or anything like that. But from a left tackle standpoint, I like Orlando Brown Jr. a lot. I thought he was on pace not only to make the Pro Bowl, but maybe push for an All-Pro nod this year, which he's never done. I thought he was playing at a really, really high level. Amarius Mims, there's reason to believe in him. Ted Karras, thought played pretty darn well, especially when you take into consideration the guards that he's playing next to. So that's where you have to get better. And they need to add multiple. And when you say draft and free agency, Jake, I think that they know they need to add multiple. This just can't be a, let's replace Alex Kappa. Let's move on from him. He's a cap casualty. Let's replace him. They need multiple guards. And that doesn't mean they can't have position flex and play tackle 2 or play center. I'm open to that. But they need 2 starting guards this offseason.
Yeah, I don't care about position flex as much when you're talking about starters. I mean, it's nice. Don't get me wrong.
For sure.
It's nice to have guys that can play guard while they're learning the NFL and maybe take over for Ted Karras at center in the future. And maybe Matt Lee is the Bengals center of the future. Maybe not. I don't think that should rule out a center/guard prospect. And certainly there are going to be tackle/guard prospects in this draft. And I think that's where a lot of the strength of the interior line class will come from, depending on who you ask, when guys are projecting certain tackles to kick into guard in the NFL. I think that is where a lot of strength in this guard class will come from, because the pure guards, the guys who play guard in college, there's only a handful of those guys in this draft. But there are some guys available in free agency that should be starter level options, should be solid starter level options for the Bengals to explore. And that will be their task. But I do think that when he says it's a focus and we're going to add to that spot, and he reiterates it, there is an awareness that it's not just one player. And talk is cheap, quite frankly, is the other point here. And this is going to apply for all of these things. Everything that Duke Tobin is saying, it's great to have that self-awareness. It's great to have that plan or that idea for what you want to execute with your offseason. It's great to talk about all these things, and I'm sure they have plans A through Z lined up, right? Mm-hmm. And all the alternatives that we're going to talk about with keeping their own guys and what direction they need to go in free agency and what direction that means they need to go in the draft and all that stuff. But it's going to come down to executing those plans. It always does. And so while we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about the positives of Duke Tobin's self-awareness, that he seems to say, yeah, we're going to fix these things that we know are flaws, and we agree with Duke Tobin are flaws on the team, and that anybody can see are flaws on the team, then they have to turn around and they'll still have to execute those plans, right? And that's where we're going to spend a lot of time talking about these plans today, and then the underlying, maybe not as said or implied sentiment there is, then you got to go do it when it's time to start making moves.
Yeah, for sure. Have to execute, have to find a way to get the best protection for an eye and be able to run the ball, right? Those are the 2 things that I think the guard play, it just left a lot to be desired. I have a question for you on how they address it, because I think that the fan base feels pretty strongly about this, and I'm curious to see how you view it. Plus, there's a Bengals veteran that is making some progress, and well, he's going to be a free agent in a month. And I'm curious if you think they should bring him back. So I'll ask Jake Liscow both of those things coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It is here. It is Super Bowl week, and Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, betting on the coin toss, national anthem, anything and everything in between, FanDuel is going to make it easy to get in on all of the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. It is the easiest app to use. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book for a reason. So if you're looking for the props, if you're looking for the odds, if you're looking for all of the, quite honestly, silly props that come with the Super Bowl, FanDuel is going to have them for you. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, Jake, real quick, before I get to the minor injury update, I think there are a lot of fans that want this position solved, so they're thinking draft. What if the Bengals went and got a Zach Martin or got one of these journeyman veteran guards to plug and play for this year? How would you feel about that if they went the veteran path, kind of like how they've gone at right tackle, if they did that at guard?
I would say as a patchwork solution, you'd certainly still be open to an early guard if that was the approach. I would be surprised if the Bengals went that route. I think that from Duke Tobin's comments, that doesn't seem to be their approach to it. But while I would be certainly totally fine with Kevin Zeitler being part of next year's solution,
another one. Yeah.
I would want them to also have some young talent as well. Like I'm not very interested in seeing two veteran journeymen or even really good veterans just on the last legs of their career, perhaps be the two guards for the Bengals. If it's one of them for 1 year, maybe you could talk me into that, but it wouldn't be the most exciting plan because I do think that there are other options available to the Bengals. What are your thoughts there?
I don't feel strongly about it. I just want to fix it. Now, this idea of a long-term fix, it sounds good. Like we think Amari Sims is going to be really awesome and be a long-term fix, but that takes time. And I don't want them reaching in the draft.
There's also some younger free agent options that'll be a little bit more expensive than the 1 year veterans, but
sure. But they're not going to sign Trey Smith. I would be shocked, right?
No, I'm talking like the Will Freeze or Fries.
Will Freeze. Yeah,
tier.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No, there's options for sure. I'm just curious. I just want the best team in 2025. And so if that means the veteran stopgap and then you take one in the draft when you see fit, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with two veteran stopgaps and one draft pick. You can't really predict the draft. I'm just kind of open to it as long as you can move the guys in front of you to open up running lanes and pass protect for Joe. But I was just kind of curious. The other quick update before we get back to Duke Tobin's comments, Trent Brown making pretty good progress from his torn patellar tendon. Exchanged a message with him, and he's doing well. I think he hopes to be back, wants to be back. We'll see if he does return. I would be open to him returning. I don't know how you feel about that, but the swing tackle element, assuming that he's feeling pretty good, it's not like he's going to cost a lot of money. I'd be open to him returning.
Yeah, I think that you're talking about players in that category. I don't know if the Bengals' experience with him last offseason, where it took them a very long time to get him on the field, is going to give them pause about that. Of course, he's dealing with the injury that he's recovering from as well, but he is still a solid player. He was a solid player when he was out there, at least in pass protection. He couldn't move. But when you're talking about that being a tackle off the bench, that's a different proposition. Again, I would probably look elsewhere there. If it were me, I would spend a little bit more money there for your third tackle. Me personally, that would be my approach there. But if you want to just try to spend, just in the $2 million range on a third tackle, then if you feel confident in his recovery, that's the idea of the player that would feel good, but you would have to really think about how he's recovering and how that's affecting him at this stage in his career.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how they put it together. That's all, because you could sell me on him, but that doesn't mean that you don't take a tackle that you think can play guard early, right? And someone that can potentially do both with that positional flex.
And
Ultimately, we all want the same thing, right? Protect 9 and open up the run game a bit more.
yeah, I think that it's not, it's important that you keep pointing this out. It's not just protection. Protection is definitely part of it. Look at the teams that are in the Super Bowl right now. Chris Jones and why am I blanking on the last name? Jalen Davis. Jalen Davis? Jordan Davis.
Jordan Davis.
Jalen what?
From Georgia.
Okay, you don't know it either. Great, perfect. Neither of us know the names. Dominant defensive tackles in the Super Bowl. It's Jalen, right?
Man, what are you doing? Keep talking. Dominant defensive tackles in the Super Bowl. You're right.
And Duke
Jalen
Tobin
Carter.
acknowledging how many good defensive tackles there are in the NFL, which requires you, when you want to play quarterback and play offense the way the Bengals want to play offense for the majority of the game, before it becomes important to run the ball. And it's important early in the game too, but to finish the game with the running game, you need to be able to handle these defensive tackles. And it's
Jalen
not just
Carter.
the two teams in the Super Bowl. Carter, of course.
There you go. You threw me off. I was not ready. I was not ready for that. But yes, obviously that's a huge factor. You think about how the Bengals seasons have ended. The Super Bowl 56, what is it? It's an interior AFC championship game. It is Chris Jones getting that play. And it's against backups. And so like those decisions are so huge because linemen 6 through 8 are probably playing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a big part of it as well, whether it is the technique for the young guys, if those are young players, or it's bringing in veterans and spending a bit more on veterans. I think that they got to find a way to just be much better in that area, both areas. Because by the way, if they can move people in the run game, it's going to make their life easier in the run game. You know, the thing I'm sick of is like, oh, it's so tough on them. Yeah. Well, if they could move someone, then maybe the Bengals would run the ball more. I don't think Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor are anti-run game. I think that a big part of it was, this is not the best option. The best option is putting it in my hands. And I'm sure Joe would be open to a better run game if they had it.
There's honestly a quote from Duke Tobin that we'll get to that gets into why I think they played the way they played, especially in 2024. I do think that they're always going to be a pass-first team with Joe Burrow, and that's fine. But
it should be. Yeah.
As we transition to talk about the defense, one of the things that Duke Tobin is recognizing when he's talking about we need to get better on the defensive line and all this stuff, we need to get better in the pass rush, is you have to earn those opportunities because we're in too many third and shorts on defense. And you flip that on the other side, getting more third and shorts on offense, and it's going to make the job harder for opposing defenses. They're not going to be able to tee off as much on you in those situations, especially if you have a legitimate threat of running the ball on third and short, on 3rd and 2, where they have to think, oh, maybe Joe Burrow isn't going to drop back and try to throw this ball, right? If you have that threat, it does make a difference in the way teams can defend you. And while that applies to the Bengals defense as well, I think you can turn around and apply that to the Bengals offense and say, well, if we force opposing defenses to earn pass rush opportunities a little bit more than we did by being more efficient on early downs, especially with the run game, and these things all tie together. And I'll read, I think, pretty good quote from Duke Tobin about that in a few minutes. Then it makes everything easier. And I think that a lot of that does have to do with having the ability to move people in the run game on your offensive line, which they do not do consistently at all right now.
I wonder if Kevin Zeitler could help that. See, I'm not ageist. I don't care. I'm not saying you are.
He could for a
I
year.
don't care. Sure. He's not here. By the way, I don't think the Bengals would view him as a 3-year solution. Let's be real here. Yeah. So I think we would be safe there if that came about. But I also don't want, let's give this rookie a bunch of run and he's going to be really good in 2026 or 27. It sounds good. I need to be good in 2025. And so there's the balance that they're certainly going to have to figure out. But you mentioned the defense. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about the defense coming up next. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about red flags we should avoid, but if we focus more on identifying positive signs in our relationships, those green flags, if you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, married, building a friendship, or working on yourself, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Therapy helps you develop healthy boundaries and improves your communication skills. It empowers you to set clear expectations and express your needs in relationships, and provides tools for managing conflict in ways that strengthen your connections rather than break them down. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. It's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
James, this is all going to tie together beautifully, because as we transition to talk about the defense, there's a quote that I want to start with from Duke Tobin that shows that it all fits together, even from his perspective. Like, the way the offense is playing is so impacted by what they got on the defensive side of the ball last year. He's including the running game in this. So clearly a big focus from Duke Tobin on the defense. The quote goes, "There are elements of our team that have to get better. We have to play better defense. We have to run the ball a little bit better. But that goes hand in hand with playing defense. If you believe that you're going to hold the team, then you're a little more flexible to do some things differently on offense. I know for a fact Joe felt very pressed to play in the way he played to try to keep us ahead in games. It's not an indictment on anyone more than me." So taking some accountability there at the end, but also showing that understanding that this all fits together. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Tobin. Not that, again, words are everything, but that self-awareness that this all fits together, and this admission that the offense had to change the way it played, and Joe Burrow had to change the way he played because of an understanding of what was going on the defensive side of the ball. I think that speaks magnitudes.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm very aware of that. I'm sure you had that conversation with Joe, maybe multiple throughout the season. But you could feel that. And you think back to Joe saying, "Well, I have to be perfect." It's really, really hard. I'll use the baseball analogy. If you go up to the plate every time thinking you have to get on base every single time, obviously you want to, but if you feel that pressure even more, it's kind of amazing to see him play the way he did this year, considering that he probably thought in a lot of these games he's going to have to hang 40 on their opponent. And I think Duke gets it. Like, gets out. Like, it's not like he's like, you read what you read on social media and you see all these things. It's not like he doesn't understand like, we're talking about a guy who's an NFL lifer, and I'm sure he understands where they need to get better. My main concern, as is everybody's, will they, and this goes back to yesterday's show, do what's required to get to the level that they need to get to, and not cut corners is the wrong word, but not pretend that they're maximizing what they have. Because I do think that they know what they need to do. And it's trusting themselves in every moment, and being able to push to uncomfortable levels, I would say, in that building that they haven't necessarily pushed before. Because I do think that they evaluate better than maybe given credit for. But when you're forced to draft, for example, you're forced to address defense, a defensive tackle with multiple draft picks because you know you need those bodies, and you're not going to spend more money on proven guys. Well, that's an issue. It's really hard to get a plug and play nose tackle in a draft that didn't have many nose tackles, right? And so that's one of the many things I hope they kind of avoid. But they have a lot of holes that they have to fill, and I think they know it.
And when you say forced, by themselves,
No,
right?
for
By
sure.
their approach.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's part of the criticism yesterday, right? Is, can they take the necessary steps? Can they execute a plan that doesn't require them to go 6 for 6 in the draft this year, right?
Mhm.
Because that's nearly impossible. It probably could happen, but as much as we're going to sit here after these draft picks and say, yeah, here's how this guy fits, probably 50% of them don't fit. That's just the way the draft works. On the topic of the defense, Duke Tobin did seem particularly focused on the pass rush when evaluating the defensive line. This is where that quote that I mentioned earlier, we need more pass rush. You've got to get yourself in pass rush situations more than we did. We had too many manageable third downs. Playing with the lead means more than just scoring on offense. You have to get the stops on defense to really play with the lead. We weren't getting those stops. So an awareness of multiple issues on defense there, both in stopping the run to earn those pass rush opportunities, being better on early downs, and obviously an awareness that they need to improve the pass rush. He did say that he's pretty bullish on some of these young guys. He remains optimistic, and this may be Duke Tobin doing GM speak, but he remains optimistic on Chris Jenkins, McKinley Jackson, and Cedric Johnson. But he also did say, we're going to add to that spot. When talking about the interior in particular, similar to the interior on the offensive line, there was a repeated emphasis on we're going to add to that spot. I don't think that showed up as much at the edge position, James, where instead of talking about potentially adding to that spot, I don't think they've ruled this out by any means. He's talking instead about, I don't give up on Myles Murphy. He's got to get in a groove. He's got to play more. He's got to finish his rushes where he's winning. He's got to finish at the top of his rush. But there wasn't such an emphasis on adding to the edge position as I read Duke Tobin. Now, of course, that could change once the plan comes into contact with time and they figure out who's actually available to them. We'll see what happens with Trey. If they have to make a decision on Trey, they might have to go a different direction there. But just judging from these comments on defense, the overall focus is figuring out the fit at safety for Geno Stone. That's part of the conversation, but certainly a focus on the defensive line and the interior of that defensive line being better in both phases of his job.
I think you can see the why with Lou a little bit in these comments. The frustration of not playing some of these young guys. And we'll see. We'll see who's right. I think the front office is bullish on some of these pass rushers. It doesn't mean, like you said, that they won't address it. But it also goes back to the offensive line conversation. If you can get a game changer in the middle, it can really change things. And in a guy that's commanding double teams, makes it real hard to double team Trey and a guy in the middle. Now, I don't know if they'll be able to get that guy this offseason, but it would be better. It would be ideal to find someone that can give you some pressure there consistently. That's what they thought Sheldon Rankins was going to do. Obviously, that didn't work.
Maybe it's time to stop taking half steps on the defensive line, right? Like to actually make an investment there, because they spent a lot of money, but they spread it out so much that you have a bunch of mid-tier guys and you're not getting the production from them that you could get instead from some lower budget guys and one guy that actually costs some money.
Sure. And I think that's the balance. We'll see who else is out there. I think there will be some cap casualties and some guys probably made available between now and in free agency or even sooner than that. So they have to get better there. They have to find a way. And whether it's Locked On Bengals fan favorite, Calais Campbell, I mean, he gets mentioned every podcast, it seems like. Whether Javon Hargrave gets released by the 49ers, it sounds like he's going to. Like, I'm not against that type of player, but you can't just do that. You're looking at the draft and you need to find someone that's going to give you some juice on the defensive front. You just need it. And so that'll be draft, that'll be free agency. That's got to be both. It's the bottom line. They have to find it in both spots.
And Calais Campbell should be an and to any of your plans, quite frankly. Like, you can do Milton Williams and Calais Campbell. You can. I promise. It works. It will be a season of upheaval on the defensive side of the ball here, James.
Hargrave and Williams. Oh, boy. Now that, woo-wee.
I would have to go see what Hargrave has done lately.
Oh, last year he was good in 23, missed most of last year with an injury.
These NFC guys.
Oh,
besides
Eagles guys.
Williams.
Eagles guys. They'll bring their Eagles jersey. I know Hargrave was in San Francisco the past couple of years, but you're talking about Eagles dudes.
I mean, are we going to be talking about Mekhi Becton again for a guard spot this offseason after what he did with Philadelphia? Is he going to be open to that? I don't know what the future looks like for Becton in the guard spot. One last quote to close on here, James, that underlines the amount of changes that are coming. Is Duke Tobin just straight up acknowledging we're going to have to evaluate who's going to play up to that, meaning the money they're spending and who isn't. We're going to have to make changes. There's going to have to be an influx of young players. We're going to have to reevaluate where money is being spent, how much is being spent on each position. is that money going where it needs to go? Underlines what we've been talking about, James, I think quite a bit. There are a number of cuts coming. There will be money reallocated from players that they do not feel they're getting their money's worth on to players that they're hoping will provide value for that money. And that's where I come back to that idea of like playing too many mid players. You have to do some of that. I get it. But the Bengals defense is made out of mid-level contracts for mid-level players. And at some point that's just not good enough when you don't have the star power to go with it. And they don't really have that right now. So we'll see what these changes bring. Like I said, it's going to come down to execution. They've got a lot of work ahead of them this offseason. But I think that these conversations did reveal that largely what fans see as problems, so does Duke Tobin in the front office. And it's just a matter of how they go about fixing it.
Yep. And that's checking the right box in late January, early February. Can't do anything about it yet, realistically, but certainly checking the right box here.
Yeah, there are many different paths that they can take to get there. And we'll talk about those. We've got one more NFL game, though, this season, which gives us the opportunity to talk about what the Bengals can or should learn from the teams in the Super Bowl, an exercise that I think a lot of teams and a lot of media certainly do every year. And we will take a look at that topic in our last episode of the week. That'll come out tomorrow. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.